Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review What's Your Pleasure by Jessie Ware. To be quite honest with you, this was an album that I had absolutely no idea what to expect of it. I didn't know who Jessie Ware was at all. This is basically my introduction to her, and it's just one of those albums that I saw blowing up like tremendously. In such a short period of time, this has immediately become one of the most highly praised albums I've seen from this year. And so it obviously grabbed my attention, but it's with occasions like this from artists that I don't know before where I'm just like, oh, it's another case of an album that just blows up now and it's probably going to be forgotten in a certain period of time. So I wasn't pretty sure what to expect of it, but I actually ended up feeling that I should give this album a shot since I liked some of the genres that I saw accompanied to this album, being dance pop and disco. So I was like, okay, this album maybe would have a nice throwback to some more old school sounds of pop music. And listening to this album, I can say that, yep, I totally get the hype behind this. This album is amazing. This is an absolutely fantastic album. It caught me completely off guard. I wouldn't expect I would like this as much as I did since, like I said, it was unexpected. I didn't know anything about this artist and I haven't heard any of her previous works. I just saw that this album was so much highly praised. And so far this is without a doubt my pop album of the year, and I doubt that there's going to be any other album in the pop sphere that is going to surpass this. Because it's not just a throwback into so many of the different sounds and genres that this album portrays in so many different tracks, but it's the way it's executed. Because we're not just talking about a pop album that relies on some main singles that tend to be like extremely punchy and energetic. Instead, I love not only how catchy this album is, but it's also a really soothing album, quite sensational, quite passionate to its whole sound and production. And it's not just an album that relies on some main pop elements. In its whole structure, in its songwriting, this is a very well established album with some very pristine, very lavish, colorful production with a huge different variety of so many different sounds that are combined and balanced so well together. This is such a well put together album in anything it does. And also Jessie Ware's performance in this thing is simply stunning. I absolutely love the vocals on this thing and just how soulful and passionate her whole performance is in this entire album. What's also quite interesting with this whole project is that when it comes to the terms of structure, it doesn't just rely on some pretty predictable ideas you can get in a pop album, which by themselves is certainly not a bad thing. I like simplistic ideas, but I like how this album just expands and likes to drag the songs even more. Some of them go for about 4 or 5 minutes, and in their whole structure they don't feel boring or that they're just putting so much unnecessary material. Instead, all of this just runs so smoothly and it's so well placed. So it makes for every single moment and every single piece of instrumentation over here to actually sound purposeful. This is also one of the most consistent pop albums I've heard in a long time. It is very impressive how this album is just hit after hit after hit. There's not a single moment where the album just decides to drastically fall off, just like dropping 1 or 2 completely forgettable and unnecessary ballads out of nowhere. Instead, this whole album from start to finish, it's really groovy, extremely catchy, really danceable, but it's not like we're talking about non-stop energy. This album is just so elegant and it's simply such a beautiful and gorgeous experience from start to finish. Now, of course, not every single track over here is an absolute masterpiece. There are certainly moments that I see myself enjoying more compared to others, but even with the case with some of the tracks that I would say are my least favorite out of this album, there was not basically a moment moment that I didn't really enjoy out of this album. For example, tracks like Adore You end up being the more laid back cut, which is not a bad thing by itself. There was certainly a very nice sense of production and sound to this whole thing, but I would say that I would like something even more to it. I would like a more rich sound for the most part. And there is also the track Mirage Don't Stop, which is certainly a very groovy track that has an amazing chorus to it, which is very alive and vibrant, but there were some parts of the instrumentation and some of the verses that were not that much of my cup of tea. But even like with these occasions, these were still tracks that I enjoyed, that I liked a lot. It's just that I don't see myself coming back to those tracks as much compared to some other moments over here. And in my opinion, the album makes an amazing introduction with the tracks Spotlight and What's Your Pleasure. Two tracks that manage in an incredible way to put you in the mood for what's about to come, with their very detailed production, a beautiful throwback to disco music with so many different pieces of instrumentation that, like I said, they're just balanced so nicely to this whole mix, and the vocals are just so incredible on these tracks. Then we have some other moments like Ooh La La and Soul Control that could go even further to styles like boogie or synth funk and synth pop. Like Ooh La La, for example, has a very groovy slap bass to it, and also Soul Control kind of gives me the impression that I'm also listening to a sort of a new age era song. One of the more unique but also one of my favorite moments out of this album is definitely the track Save a Kiss, since this track feels like it's more of a throwback to a more recent sound of like house music with elements of like 90s and 2000s era house music, which still though has elements of like 80s with some of the synths accompanying to this track. But overall there is such a nice feel to it, especially when it comes to the chorus, which is so soulful, such a powerful and such an emotional and very strong experience. Then the album goes back to the new disco roots with tracks like In Your Eyes, and then the highlights just keep on coming with tracks like Step Into My Life and Read My Lips, which is possibly going to be my personal favorite. It's definitely one of the more simplistic cuts out of this album, but the groove to this thing, it's just so catchy, and it's definitely like one of the most infectious tracks and the most addictive ones out of this entire album. Then there's also the track The Kill, which in my opinion is a great song, and in my opinion the album saves one of the best moments for last with the track Remember Where You Are. This track has possibly the greatest and the most infectious chorus out of this entire album. This is just so beautiful, so gorgeous. Jessie's vocal range to this thing is just simply stunning. I absolutely love this thing, and for its longer runtime, going for 5 minutes, it doesn't like get boring or repetitive or predictable at all. This is quite impressive actually, and it happens with lots of moments in this album. You know, someone could say that I have a bias towards like disco music, which yeah, I like disco music, probably a bit more than some of the viewers from this video. But the incredible thing about this album is that the new disco and the boogie and the synth funk elements of this album, they do not sound like outdated, they don't sound generic. There is a great sense of like songwriting in this thing, there is incredible production and some beautiful vocals to this thing. By any means is this album revolutionary or making something new or refreshing to the genre. However, it's so impressive how consistent this album is, not having a single weak moment to it. Everything is just so well put together, and so as a result it makes it even better compared to some of the albums where you would say it takes an inspiration from. It is also, like I said, such a passionate and a sensational album, and all of the context provided in this, it's just done in such an adorable and elegant way without being unnecessarily raunchy or explicit, which by itself I don't think it's a bad thing when it comes to like pop lyrics, but when an album is just as smooth as this, it's only appropriate to just having this kind of content even lyrically. So I absolutely love this album, huge pleasant surprise, so even if not every single moment over here shines, we're still talking about an album that doesn't have a bad or a mediocre moment to it. So absolute recommendation for fans of pop music and for those who want a more of a throwback sound without feeling quite basic or generic, and definitely one of my favorite moments of the year so far. I'm going to give What's Your Pleasure an 8+ out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.